An ACT Liberal politician has used a parliamentary debate on inclusion to lament the lack of government support for heterosexual white men. Mark Parton said white males aged over 30 who held down a job were not really included in anything. Reporter Dan Borsha has more from Canberra.
This all started yesterday, as you mentioned, in a debate around inclusion in the Legislative Assembly here, where the discussion was around ways to better include all facets of society into government policy and the way that things are done. In particular, a focus on Indigenous Australians, on women, on gender diverse, on those from many different multicultural backgrounds. Well, Mark Parton, who's the opposition spokesman for gambling, said that there was not enough focus on white men. Here's what he had to say.
I always find it fascinating that we focus on all of these groups who we're not going to leave behind. But if you are a heterosexual employed white male over the age of 30, you're not really included in anything. Now, I know that those on the other side would say that heterosexual employed Anglo males have opportunities aplenty, so we don't need to look after them. They'll be okay. Well, Madam Assistant Speaker, let me tell you that 75% of suicides in this country are men, and overwhelmingly they are men 30 to 54.
And many people have picked up on the points this morning that Mr Parton made about male suicide. The numbers are staggering, and there's been no question of that and no question that we should be discussing that more broadly in society. However, lots of criticism of using this, conflating two very different issues for what has now been described as politicisation of these matters. Of course, Mr Parton has been prominent in the media before. He's a former radio presenter for breakfast shows, and he also compared addictive gambling to chocolate addiction not long ago. And when I asked him about that, said he had no data to prove that, but was sure that that was the case here in the ACT. This morning, he says that he's been taken out of context, that the points that he was making have been cherry-picked to show one side of his discussion. He also spoke about the greyhound ban that's been enacted here and says that that is causing big issues, in particular for men as well in this community, and that many of these matters aren't being discussed. Now, some of his colleagues have already spoken on this. I spoke to one of his colleagues this morning and asked whether he thought that this was the right tact, whether this was a helpful comment, and he said not necessarily, not entirely, no. And for the government's part, they've also been very critical today. Here's what Megan Fitzharris, the Labor frontbencher, had to say.
I think it does, and I think it was unnecessarily divisive. It's also important to listen as well as talk in the Assembly. And sometimes I think there's a bit too much talking and not quite enough listening.
And certainly many academics today saying that there needs to be considered discussion on all of these matters, on inclusion within our society, also on gender matters, which are very high profile at the moment, and of course around suicide matters as well. A big divide on social media and on the text line here at ABC Radio Canberra and ABC Canberra today, saying that for many that these comments were out of line. Some though saying that he's made an interesting point that needs to be discussed more broadly. You'd have to think, though, that this is not the end of this discussion.